this computer. All right, so we're continuing on Daf Hey Amud Beis 5b, and we've been learning about the greatness of humility and how it bothers Hashem so much. People that are haughty and ego, and we have a little bit more left to this Gemara, and then we will get into a new. We're going to go back to our Mishnah and have an interesting discussion on our Mishnah. But let's first finish off the Agadata Gemara, like the stories and the verses and the lessons we learned. We're going to first finish that piece of Gemara. So Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. So Rabbi Yeshua, the son of Levi, said, Bo urei, come and see. Kama gedolim, how great is Nemuche Haruach, the humble people, L'fnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, before Hashem. Come and see how great. Another lesson. We keep on bringing proofs in different ways to see how much Hashem. Remember, we said Hashem is like chose Har Sinai, Mount Sinai, because it was the smallest mountain. Come and see how great it is before Hashem, the people that are humble. Because when the time when the temple stood, Adam Makriv Oila, a person would bring a burnt offering. There was a number of different offerings that a person could bring: a sin offering, a guilt offering, a burnt offering, a peace offering. So the guy comes to bring a burnt offering, or as they call it, an elevation offering. It's completely burnt to Hashem. Schar Oila biyadai, the merit of an olah, of a burnt offering, the yada is in his hand. So he gets that merit. He went, he invested, he bought an elevation offering, a burnt offering, and that elevation burnt offering is the merit that he gets. Good. Or mincha, or he could choose to bring a meal offering. Remember, we learned that in the Chumash class, that if the guy didn't have a lot of money, or he wanted to bring a gift of a meal, a flour offering, he brings a flour offering for whatever the reason he's bringing it. Schar mincha biyada schar, the merit, the reward of the mincha offering, of the flour offering, biyada is in his hand. So he gets that. He went, he did the mitzvah, he went, he brought that sacrifice, he gets that reward. Aval, but mishadaita ishvala, someone who's a humble person, makes himself small. Maila olav akasu, the Torah considers it olav on him, ki'ilu, as if he sacrificed kol karbanas kulam, all the karbanas, all kulam, all of them, all of the sacrifices, not just one. So usually you have an obligation, you fulfill your obligation, you only get the merit of that one obligation that you brought, not all of them. But if you're a humble person, it's like you sacrifice all the sacrifices. Shenemar, what's my source for this? Rabbi Shimon Levi is saying, what's a source? Because it says in Tehillim, Zivchei Elokim, the sacrifices, plural. Sacrifices, including all the sacrifices to God, is Ruach Nishbara, is a broken heart. Someone who's a humble, simple person is considered as if he brought all the sacrifices before Hashem. So it's greater. Imagine the value of one sacrifice. That's only worth one sacrifice. The sacrifice that you brought. The guy is a humble person, Ruach Nishbara, he's a low spirit, a humble person. It's as if he brought all the different sacrifices. And that's how great Rabbi Shimon Levi wants to prove. That's how great it is before Hashem. And not just that alone. His prayer is not despised by God. Hashem always loves his prayer. Shenemar, as it says in the verse, Leiv nishbar v'nitka, a broken and a low heart. Elikim lo yisivzeh, God will not despise. Imagine a thing, you're praying, God is interested, not interested. If a person's a humble person, you know for sure that that's someone that Hashem looks to and is not despised by that person. And one more thing, he brings from this great scholar, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. And Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, that's an acronym for his name. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says, Kol Hasham or Chaysav, whoever weighs. Sham means like he weighs his path. Va'ilam haza, in this world. Whoever weighs his path in this world, he's going to merit and see the Yeshuos, the miracles, Shalakadosh Baruch Hu of Hashem. Now, Shenemar, where do we see that someone who evaluates, and I'll explain what does that have to do with humility in a minute. I was wondering when I first was learning the Gemara. But it says, whoever weighs his path will see miracles. Al tikri v'sam, but he says, don't. So the simple meaning is, I think it means that someone arranges sham. He arranges his path that he should do what's right. Hashem will reward him. Now, when I heard Rabbi Zions's class on this Gemara, I don't know where he took it from exactly. I didn't get a chance to learn the original Gemara where it comes from there, but he says that the scholar Rabbi Shua ben Levi was sitting, I believe he said, in yeshiva, and he was trying to learn. But it was a day, I think before a holiday, that a lot of people come to class to learn. And he didn't want, usually he would ask questions because it's an obligation on him to learn Torah. So he would ask as many questions as he could from his teacher. But when a lot of big class came, a lot of people came, he was concerned that maybe his teacher would not know the answer to his question and he would be embarrassed. You know, they're not regularly here. A lot of not regulars will be here. So maybe they don't know, maybe if the teacher knows the answer or not. So he'll have to say, I don't know, and it'll look bad in front of all the students. So he said, listen, I know I want to learn Torah, but out of the calculation of humility, i.e. that he's not going to ask because he doesn't want to possibly offend his teacher, he's not even going to learn, let go maybe a little bit on the fact that he needs to understand and know Torah. And that's kind of humility, obviously. So somebody who evaluates the cost and loss in a humble way, we'll see the miracles of Hashem. Al-Tikri v'sam, don't say, the simple meaning is v'sam. It means that he sets his way in front of him. I believe the meaning is to live a good life, to do what Hashem wants. Hashem will be good for him. He says v'sham derech. Read it as that you calculate to make sure, not that you're laying your path in front of you, Hashem will make you successful, but that you're evaluating your path and you're making sure that you're living a life of humility is your guiding light in your decision-making, the things that you do. And if you do live in that way of humility, Hashem will make sure to bring you great miracles in your life. And that is the end of a page of Gemara that we learned before and that we continue learning today about the discussion of the Talmud, about the greatness of humility, and a tremendous amount of Gemara. We learned many, many lines discussing the greatness of humility and the problem with a person being an ego. Now we're going to go back to the Mishnah. That's the end of that Gemara. We're going to go back to the Mishnah and discuss a topic on our Mishnah. But let me first, to make it easier, I'm going to actually bring back up that original Mishnah from the first page of Gemara that we learned, and then let's go over it. We'll go over it quickly together just to see what it's talking about. And we're going to conclude this Gemara with this section of the Mishnah. We're going to conclude discussion of this Mishnah. Let's go over it quickly. It's on 2a, and I'll bring it up over here. If somebody warns his wife, he's jealous of his wife. So Rabbi Lezer says, how does he warn her? He warns her in front of two. Then he gives her to drink based on the testimony of one. So there has to be two witnesses to the warning and one witness to seeing the act that she went and hid with the guy. Or based on his own saying that he saw her with that man. We're not going to, I'm just going through quickly because we're not going to discuss the first part of the Mishnah. Just to recap, Yeshua says that we warn her with two witnesses, mashkal pishnaim, and you have to have two witnesses there for the drinking. So then, and now's where the new discussion comes in. The Mishnah asks, well, Keitzad mekanala, how does he warn her? What takes place? What does the warning consist of? What does the husband have to say? It's an interesting basic question that the Mishnah asks. What, and that's a discussion for our Gemara, what does he do to warn her? Now, the Gemara is going to question the answer of the Mishnah, because it's basically going to say, Amar la b'fnei shnayim. He tells her in front of two people, Al tidabri im ish ploini, don't speak to that man. It doesn't say don't hide with that man, it says don't speak to the man. And look what the Mishnah says, v'dibra imay, and she goes and she speaks to him, doesn't listen to him. He told her not to speak, didn't say don't hide. And she went and spoke to him. Adayin hi mutares lebeisa, she could still go back to her house, meaning she could still go back to her husband. And she could still eat the truma, her husband, if her husband's a kohen, she could still have the in of eating his truma. Now, the Gemara is going to say, I don't get it. Didn't you just ask, what does the husband have to do to warn her in order for her to be prohibited to him? She's in a suspected adulteress because she didn't listen. And what do you answer me? I ask you, what does he need to say in his warning to her to get her not to be able to live with him as a husband and wife anymore. And you're answering me a case, which is that doesn't count, that he didn't tell her, don't hide with the guy. He told her, don't speak to the guy. And she went and spoke to him. She didn't listen to what he told her. And she went and spoke to him, and she still could stay married to him. I thought I just asked you to give me the case of the Mishnah that talks about the correct way to warn, and you're giving me a case which is the incorrect way to warn, and that is the next piece of Gemara that we're having here on Daf Hey Amud Beis on 5b. The two dots, you see the two dots implies that we're going to discuss going back to our Mishnah and discuss that question. So we're holding again somewhat about halfway down on Hey Amud Beis, going back to the conversation of our Mishnah. Kates in the canon law. The Mishnah said, he quotes the word, the Mishnah asks, well, what is the case of the husband warning the wife? How is it done? So what's the way? So the Gemara says, Hagufa Kasha, this is alone a question. I don't understand how you read this Mishnah. Amart, you first say, Amar la b'fnei shnai, no, so Hagufa Kasha, and this is a question. I ask you, you want to know what's the way to warn her, and then Amart, what do you answer? Amar la b'fnei shnai. What does the Mishnah answer? He says in front of her, and he brings the incorrect case, a case that doesn't work as a good one. Al tidabri mish pulo, al tidabri, don't speak mish pleni zeh with this man. So it would seem from that, the wording, in other words, if you wouldn't read the Mishnah any further, you would stop right there. How do you warn the woman? And he says, tell the woman, don't speak to that guy. Alma, I would see just from those words, that dibur stirahu, that word, telling your wife, don't speak with the guy. If I would have stopped at the Mishnah right there, that's considered hiding. And if she went and she hid with him, or not, even if she went and spoke to him, it would be prohibited. If I would be a regular guy reading the Mishnah, how do you warn your wife? Tell your wife, don't speak to this guy. I would have stopped right there and said, and then obviously if she spoke to him, she should violate the prohibition. That should be the method of warning, and then she should not be able to stay married to him. But Tani, now where it throws me off is the next clause of the Mishnah, which then he follows that up with saying, I ask you, how do you warn her? And you answer me by saying, don't speak to the guy. But then you say, Dibra Ima, if she does speak to him after that warning of him saying, don't speak to him, she clearly violates what he told her. Adayin, she's still Mutaris Leveis, allowed to go back home. Mutaris Lachel Betruma, and she's allowed to eat the truma of her husband, the Kayin. If her husband is a Kayin, only his family is allowed to eat the truma with him, because like he's responsible for his family's finances, and they're part of, they get what he gets, and when he gets the 2% of truma that he collects, only him and his family, she's still allowed to eat from him because she's still married to him. If she just spoke to the guy, she never hid with him. So Alma, so the second half of that sentence implies that dibur loiklum, that speaking is nothing. So make up your mind. I'm confused when I read the Mishnah. First I say, how do you do the warning? And you answer me, oh, you do the warning by telling your wife, don't speak to that guy. Okay, I thought that was clear. Then you said, well, if she went and spoke to him, then she's still allowed to stay married to him. So that's not a good warning. So Abaya says, Hachi Ka'amar, this is what it means. It's like saying this is the way to read it. It's very, a lot of times Mishnahs are written very short, and they use short words to give you more information. He's trying to give you more information. He's trying to tell you, very interesting, as the Gemara is going to delineate now. There are 3 ways that it doesn't count. He actually doesn't answer your question right away. He's not answering the question. The question was, well, how do I warn the wife? And his answer is, well, there's 3 ways that won't work. He's right away telling you the 3 ways that don't work. So here are the 3 ways. The Gemara is going to explain the 3 ways that won't work if the husband warns his wife in those ways. Al tidabri, if he first tells her, don't speak to the guy, and she clearly violates exactly what he told her, v'dibra, and she went and spoke to him. That's option 1. The Gemara is going to say that doesn't count. It's not a problem still, even though he told her not to do something, and she did what he told her not to do, but still it's only speech, and therefore it's not a problem. Or what happens if he said, Al tidabri, don't speak to him, v'nistira, and she went and hid with him, but he never warned her about the hiding, only warned her about the speaking. She's still not a suspected adulteress because he never told her, I don't want you to hide with the guy. He only told her, I don't want you to speak to him. Or if Al tisasri, or if he said, don't hide with him, which is the correct way of warning, but v'dibri imai, all she did was speak to him. She never hid with him in a room. In all those 3 cases, adayin muteres lebeisa, she is still allowed to go back home to her house. She's still allowed to stay married to her husband, umuteres, and she's mutter. She's permitted la'achol b'truma, to eat the truma from her husband, the kayim. Okay, so that is very interesting. The Gemara is telling you, Abai, I think it was, is saying the way to understand the Mishnah was telling you that unless it's exactly him telling her, don't hide with the guy, and then she went and hid with the guy, if it was in other scenarios, she wouldn't be violate the case of, she wouldn't be considered a suspected adulteress, a saita, and she would still be allowed to return to her family. And that is the end of this part of the Mishnah. Continuing along the last piece, we also said, going back to, we're just bringing up our Mishnah quickly. You don't have to go back because it's just a short idea here. Then the Mishnah ended saying, so if it was an incorrect case, it was a case where, I'm sorry, let's finish the Mishnah together. Nichnes sa'imay leveis haseiser. If she did go and hide with him, if the husband did tell her, don't hide with him, and she did go and hide with the suspected adulteress that the guy that the husband said, don't hide with him. The Mishnah finished, and she waited long enough with him to become impure. As we learned to the Gemara, the Mishnah, the whole page of Gemara, we discussed how long that is. Asura, right? We had like 8 different opinions. Asura levesa, then she's prohibited to go back to her house, go back to her husband. So now she's not allowed to, we don't know that she did anything, but we know she was in the room. Once she was in the room, everything freezes. Her married life freezes, and she cannot go back till we figure out what really happened. And asura lachal b'truma, she cannot continue to eat the truma. If her husband's a kohen, we don't know if anything happened. If something happened, then she's not allowed to stay married to him. She's not allowed to eat the truma, and therefore put it on hold. She's a suspected adulteress. We put it on hold. And finally, the third case, and this is the one we're going to finish off discussing, the Gemara about the case of our Mishnah. The last thing we're going to discuss, he picks an interesting scenario. What happened? She's a suspected adulteress. We never confirmed what happened. She never drank the water yet, so it wasn't confirmed. And the husband died. There's an interesting halacha, a very interesting law, that if the guy dies without any kids, the wife is supposed to marry the guy's younger brother. Special mitzvah, because he didn't have any kids. Husband dies, she should marry the younger brother and continue his legacy, his lineage, off the brother who passed away, for the brother that passed away. Now, but we have a problem here. She was not allowed to be married to her husband. She was in an in-between case where she had to separate from her husband. What does she do with the new younger brother now? She has usually 2 options in a normal case. Either yibum, she does some kind of a quasi marriage ceremony, but she doesn't need to do a full marriage ceremony because she's kind of continuing the brother's original marriage. Or the opposite option is she has to get divorced, but it's not a real divorce because there was no marriage with this guy. It's a unique kind of divorce that takes place. It's called chalitza. Whatever, they take off the shoe and she spits on the floor, whatever she does there. So the Gemara tells you should know if it was a case where she was a suspected adulteress that she couldn't be with her husband, and now she ended up in the scenario which she normally would have to marry the younger brother. She's not allowed to do yibum. She's not allowed to do the partial marriage because, and we're going to say why. But Chaylet says she needs to do chalitza. She needs to do the kind of way you do a separation, a divorce from that she should not have to marry the younger brother. She's not allowed to marry the younger brother. But the Mishnah finished, she's not allowed to do yibum. She's not allowed to continue the original brother's marriage and continue with the younger brother. Now let's go back to discuss this final piece of Gemara together in the Gemara. So the Gemara said, if he dies, if the guy dies and she's in this in-between state, she has to do chalitza. She has to do the divorce kind of ceremony, the chalitza ceremony from the younger brother. So the Gemara says, why? This yabam nabi yivumi. Why can't she do yibum with him? The first brother's dead. First guy died. The issues were with him. Why is she not allowed to now create that yibum, the marriage ceremony with the younger brother that she needs to make? I mean, maybe you would say it's obvious. The Gemara is going to answer very interestingly 3 different reasons for a proof, for a source for this. Why is she not allowed to The third case, the Gemara is going to say an inference. Logically, it doesn't make sense. But before we get to logically, the Gemara is going to choose a verse, and from that verse, say it's actually in the Torah. There's a direct implication in the Torah where it's implied clearly that she's not allowed to do yibum. She has to do chalitza. She has to separate from the younger brother that she's waiting to connect. So Amar Rabbi Yosef, and Rabbi Yosef gives us all the three answers, and Abaya questions him on all the answers. So let's see the discussion. Two scholars are going to have the conversation, Rabbi Yosef and Abaya. Amar Rabbi Yosef. So Rabbi Yosef says, Amar Kara, it says a pasuk. And the next two reasons are going to use this verse. And let's learn this verse. It's the verse that talks about the main source for divorce. It's a verse in the Torah, in the 5th book of the Torah Dvarim, that describes halachically how divorce is done. It's one of the most important documents and has to be done correctly. It's very sophisticated, very particular in how it needs to be done. So what does the verse say? V'yatza, she will go out, describing her leaving her husband. Mi beiso, from his house, right, from her husband's house when she gets divorced. V'holcha, and she will go, v'hoisa, and she will be, leish, to a man, acher, another one. She's going to go out, she'll leave from her house, meaning her husband. She will go and she will be leish, to a man, acher, another man. What's bothering the Gemara in the word is leish acher. Why does it say acher? Rashi explains here also, I think. Why does it say another man? Why couldn't it just say she'll be to a guy? She'll meet a guy and she'll get married to the guy. What does it mean, another guy? A guy that's another. So he's going to give two answers. The first answer is going to be, what does it mean she should be to another guy? Meaning, leish acher, another guy, completely different guy. V'lo liyavam, and not to the yavam. So the Torah, when discusses divorce, even though it's not talking about the laws of yibum and chalitza of the younger brother when there's no children, it says she should go to another guy, a completely different guy. Specifically, the Torah throwing in that word, actually, Rabbi Yosef says, is trying to clearly tell you not to any, even if there's a child there. And you might say, okay, it's another guy, it's the younger brother. No, she should go to a completely new guy, completely separate entity, not someone that was connected to the original brother. But lish acher, the yavam, and not to the yavam. And that's why, and that is why, that's why she can't get married to the younger brother. So the Amrle Abaya, so as I told you, Abaya is going to have a discussion on each of Rebbe's answers. So Abaya says, no. If so, that the Torah clearly tells you that this woman is not allowed to connect and get together with the guy's, her husband's younger brother. Chalitza nami loiti boy. She shouldn't need to do chalitza either. Why does she need a divorce from the guy? If she's separated from her husband, causes her to be separated from, doesn't allow her to marry the younger brother, the Torah says she should find a totally new guy, then why does she even need a divorce? She's already separated from her husband because we didn't know what happened. The Torah says she's not allowed to marry this guy. Well, she's not allowed to marry this guy. Why does she need a divorce? The Torah clearly says she's not to marry this guy. Why did our Mishnah say she still needs a divorce from this guy? Maybe she should be free to go. The Torah says she can't marry him anyway. So that's a question that Abaya asked Rabbi Yosef. If the Torah is telling us that she can't marry him, why does she need a divorce? The Torah clearly says she can't marry him. So Amar Lo Yisor, Rabbi Yosef says, Ilu Asi Labal, listen, even with the husband, that we say she's a suspected adulteress, right? The original husband. Milay boy get, does she not need to get divorce from him? She still needs from her original husband a divorce. We don't know what happened even in that room. She's a suspected adulteress. We never even confirmed with the waters what happened. Her husband, unfortunately, died in between before we were able to figure it out. I don't think we could anymore give her the potion to drink. But the fact is, if she would want to marry another guy, she would actually, even though she can't stay married to her original husband, she still would need to get a get from her original husband. So therefore, since she needs a get from her original husband, there's still a bond there. Hashtanami, now too, that she's by now under the kind of tied into the younger brother to buy chalitza, she needs chalitza. So although she's not allowed to marry the younger brother, I'm not disagreeing with that, but we still have to be concerned We don't know. Maybe nothing happened in the room. Maybe she's really fully married to the guy, but just in the case of a suspected adultery. So we have to take every precaution. And just like she would need a divorce out of every precaution from her husband, she must do chalitza, because it could be she didn't do anything, let's say in theory. Maybe she's still married to her first husband fully. Now she's fully connected to the younger brother. And if she goes and marries another guy, she's considered a married woman who's with another guy. So just like she would need a get from her husband, she also would need chalitza, the separation from the younger brother. And that is possibility number one of understanding why she cannot do yibum, but she needs to do chalitza. Okay? Because just like she needs a divorce from her husband, the Torah says she can't marry him. It's not an option to do yibum. But just like she still needs a divorce, even though she can't from her husband, she also needs to do chalitza from the younger brother. Vista Amri, and some say, no, Rabbi Yosef, this is option 2. That was option 1, explaining why Mishnah said she needs to do chalitza and not yibum. This is option 2. Why? Answering our original question of why does she need to do chalitza if she doesn't need to do yibum? Rachmana Amar, or the question, I'm sorry, is why can't she do yibum? That was the original question. Why can't she marry the younger guy? He's a new guy. So here's another interesting twist. The basis is Rachmana Amar, the Torah says in divorce, back to that verse we discussed, V'yatza, she will go out, mibeso, from his house. She'll leave her husband, right? When it describes a woman getting divorced. V'holcha, and she will go Ish acher, to another man. What does it mean to another man? Now, remember, we learned on page 3 in the Gemara that a woman who is not trustworthy, who suspected adultery, is the worst thing for the house. It will destroy the house, even more than the man. The loy listire levese. Why should the husband divorce his wife in this case? So when a husband, unfortunately, has a wife that he doesn't trust what's going on, and it's extremely damaging to the home if he can't trust his wife, she should leave. And why is he divorcing, or why normally with the case of divorce, which divorce here is discussing, he's divorcing her is because she's not trustworthy, because we said it's like rotten worms in the house, in wood, that it's going to completely destroy the wood. So there's a case where there's a marriage where a husband really suspects the wife, things are going on, she's hanging around with other guys and late at night, whatever, so on, the husband should divorce her. Now, why is he divorcing her? Because she's not a healthy, straightforward person. But Amrit, V'holcha, the law, this is the Vesai. So why is the guy divorcing her? So she shouldn't ruin his house. So he's saying, could you imagine that? The guy's divorcing his wife because he doesn't trust her. That Amrit, Tisyabim Nabiyibum, and you're telling me that the younger brother should perhaps still marry this lady. So it was a case where there was a suspected adulteress, and he needs to divorce her, but it's a case where a woman is in such a case that the woman's like, it doesn't make any sense. The guy can't stay married to her anymore. How would the Torah tell you if the guy dies in between in that, that happens, where he has a wife who's a suspected adultery, he doesn't trust her? The Torah would say that there should be an option that the wife should now marry the younger brother. That's crazy. It's ridiculous. It wouldn't make any sense. And that's a basis logic. It makes sense. So he's divorcing her because she's not a trustworthy woman. Why would the Torah say now she has to be connected to him, let him fulfill his brother's lineage by marrying this untrustworthy woman that the husband would divorce? So the Gemara says, well, wait a second. If you're telling me we shouldn't marry the younger brother because she was unfaithful to her older brother, maybe she shouldn't be able to marry any guy. Abaye says, so again, remember we saying in all the 3 cases, Abaye is questioning Rabbi Yosef. It says, Elameata, well, if so, she shouldn't marry anybody. How come the Torah says he gives a divorce and she marries another guy? She shouldn't marry any other guy. If a guy is divorcing a woman because she is not a trustworthy person, she shouldn't be able to get married to anyone, not just to the younger brother. So she shouldn't ruin his house, the next guy's house. So if you're saying the Torah doesn't want him to marry the younger brother, and that's why we're telling him you shouldn't do yibum, well, what about any other guy? Interesting question. That was Abaye's question to Rabbi Yosef. Amar lei. So he says to him, there's a very big difference between the woman marrying any guy to the woman marrying the younger brother. In the case of the younger brother, it's a mitzvah from the Torah. We're going on to the next page, 6a. In the case of the younger brother, it's a mitzvah. He's automatically married to the younger brother, and we're encouraging, we're pushing him that she should marry his younger brother to continue his lineage. Are we forcing any other guy, regular guy, to take the woman who was a suspected adulteress by the first guy? So that is option number 2 of understanding the discussion between Rabbi Yosef and Abaye. That Rabbi Yosef, the Mishnah said, Rabbi Yosef explained the Mishnah that he only chalitza and no yibum. Why isn't yibum an option? Because the Torah cannot force and encourage and push the marriage to the younger brother, automatically carry along the original brother's marriage to the second brother's marriage, and it automatically happen when this guy is being divorced for the divorcing the wife because she's not, the woman was a suspected adulterer. We can't encourage it. But if the guy wants to divorce his wife, some other guy picks her up, that's his own business. It's not being forced by the Torah, and she's still allowed to marry another guy, and that would be okay as long as the Torah is not kind of forcing it or making it happen. That is fascinatingly option number 2 of our discussion. Ikada Amri, and the third option, he says it's by logic. Amr Rabbi Yosef says, look at the verse, back to that verse again. Hakasuv kore acher. The Torah says she will leave and go to another man. He's saying, let's focus on the word acher, another man. You want to know what the terminology? It's a negative connotation. The word acher, she will go to another man. The husband didn't trust his wife, and therefore he divorced her. The guy she's marrying is like a foreigner. He says, Rashi says, you want to know where we have the term acher? By idol worship, other gods. So the other doesn't just mean another guy. It's like other gods, like foreign gods, like they're totally distant. The new guy she's marrying is totally distant from the first guy. The first guy sent her out of the house because she wasn't trustworthy. So the guy is like a total foreigner. Why would he pick up such a person? So that's what it means, acher. She'ein ben zugay shel rishoin. She's a foreigner. She'ein zeh ben zugay shel rishoin. That the second guy is not, ben zugay is not on the same level as the first guy who didn't trust his wife and therefore sent her out. So the second guy is totally like a less classy person that took in what the first guy sent out. He's not equal and not on equal level to the first guy. This guy sent her out, a wicked person. She was acting like a wicked person on his house. And this guy brought in a wicked person. So he wanted her because she was, I guess, like a slut, you could say. He didn't want her because she was a bad person, and he wanted her. So this guy's two totally different people. One guy enjoys a woman who's this not good person, and one guy didn't want her. That's why he sent her out of the house. And therefore, based on that logic, that Amrit, and if that's how we understand divorce, that when a husband divorces his wife because he saw she's not behaving modestly how she should, and we're saying that the second guy is a total foreigner from the first guy, how could you imagine then, based on this understanding of the word acher in the verse, that it means that the second guy is a total foreigner to the first guy, much lower quality? How could we encourage logically? How could we encourage yibum? Bat amrit, this yabim nabi yibume. And you want to ask, how come our Mishnah does not allow for yibum to take place, explaining that the Torah only allows chalitza and not yibum? What do you mean? Divorce works, that the guy who takes in this woman is a total low-class person for taking in someone totally in a different level than the guy that sent her out. So that is the way Rabbi Yosef explained why, yes, chalitza and no yibum, because it's very unclassy of the second guy. And this brother is not what are we going to call the younger brother a foreigner to take in a person that his brother sent out of the house and made her a soita. Good. Amalei Abaye. So what does Abaye respond? Each time you have it's 3 different options of what the story, how it went down between Rabbi Yosef and Abaye. Amalei Abaye. So Abaye said to him, Ela meyatas. He says, wait a second. Who says that's so bad? Who says that's so bad? You're basically saying that the second guy who takes her in is like a much lower class guy for taking in. Let's just call it like a unhealthy woman who people don't trust. He takes her in. He's much lower than her. If so let's follow your logic along. She marries another guy because the first husband didn't trust her. She marries a second guy who obviously is much lower class for the fact taking her in. Now let's say that second guy dies without children. Now you're saying she went and married the second guy. He's a low-class guy. Maybe his younger brother shouldn't either be able to marry this woman. Loitis Yabin, would you use your same logic and say, well, maybe his younger brother should not have to marry her because he was a low-class guy for taking her in. Why are you putting it on to the younger brother? Because the verse called the first guy who married her after her ill relationships, negative, not modest life, took her in. So he took her in. Torah is not happy with that second brother. So maybe the Torah shouldn't allow and push the younger brother to marry her because you're calling that guy who married her an unhealthy person. So the man has a very interesting answer. There's a very big difference here. Gabei dahai mia b'shem toiv hava kaima. Still, you know what? When the lady married the second guy, there were no more problems. The woman was not known as like a slut, as an unhealthy person, as not known as a bad person in her second marriage. Aha. So, by the way, they say sometimes it could be the husband's fault that the woman wasn't being faithful or helpful. So, in the first marriage, it looked bad. That guy had to divorce his wife. Second guy that took her, I don't know, that's a little bit questionable. Why do you take in a woman like that who the husband doesn't trust? But now there was a second marriage. And during the second marriage, there was no issues. And therefore, relative to the younger brother, he's marrying a healthy woman. There was no issues now in the second marriage. So the Torah would not, I guess, discourage or not allow the younger brother to marry the wife of his older brother. Okay. That is the three reasons of Rabbi Yosef. We're going to finish with a little bit of a Gemara we're going to have to think. And all those three reasons of Rabbi Yosef were based on the verse. The woman goes out and marries another person, and we explain the three scenarios. Rava Amar, Rava says, again, it's going to be discussion between Rava and Abaya. Rava says, Kal v'chomer, let's do a logical inference. And here we're going to question his logical inference and see if it stands up. And Abaya is going to also put him to the task and see if he can disprove his logical inference. He says, I'll tell you why Chalitza, yes, Yibum, no. I'll tell you why you can't do Yibum with the younger brother can't do the Yibum if she was a suspected adulteress by the older brother that passed. Im Nesra b'mutar law, if she became prohibited to her husband, which was permitted to her. He and her were married. They were a healthy unit. They were allowed according to Torah. She's not allowed to now be married to him because she's a suspected adulteress. So she cannot stay married to the guy who she was permitted to. She has to separate from him. But Asur law, the one who's prohibited to her, like Kol Shekain, should she for sure not allowed to get married to? Let me explain something very interesting about the laws of Yibum, of when a younger brother marries the older brother's wife. There are many people that the Torah says, and the rabbis say, the Torah has a whole list of people you're not allowed to marry. It's considered an erva. It's considered like promiscuous. It's considered an abomination. It's considered disgusting to marry. Like, you can't marry your sibling, you can't marry a parent, you can't write intimacy with all these people. The Torah has a whole list. So, by the way, one of them is cannot marry your sister-in-law. It's one of the violations. Once you marry a guy, the sister-in-law becomes prohibited to you. Here's where it's so fascinating, the laws of what's called in English the levirate marriage. The woman that was permitted to you to marry, if it's the one unique scenario where the husband dies without children, it becomes a mitzvah, not just is it allowed, it becomes a mitzvah to marry his younger brother. So she was prohibited to him until her husband died. If she would have been with him, it would have been a violation of one of the prohibitions that she's not allowed to be together with the guy. So that's the logical inference here, the Kal v'chomer, the logical inference. Kuvav stands for Kal v'chomer. Im Nesra b'mutar law, let's go back over that line. If she's prohibited with the one that was allowed to her the whole time. We don't know what happened, therefore she can't stay married to her husband, which the whole time was allowed to her. But Asur law, the guy that was prohibited the whole time because she was married to his brother. So she was prohibited from marrying a brother-in-law, the guy, her husband's brother, like Kol Shekay. For sure she should not be allowed to marry the younger brother. And that's the logical inference to say if she can't be married to her husband, for sure she can't be married to this guy that was not allowed to be married to her. So that's what Rava said. Rava says, I'll give you a kal v'chomer, I'll give you a logical inference. I could simply settle this with logic and prove to you, I don't need a verse, I guess, to say that it's not allowed for her to do yibum. It doesn't make any sense. If she can't stay married to the husband, for sure she can't marry the brother-in-law. So Amalei Abaye, so again, Abaye is going to question. He's going to say, wait, I could bring you a case. I'm going to challenge you. I'll bring you a case where there is someone that she's not allowed to be married to her husband, yet she will end up, very interesting case, be allowed to marry her husband's brother. Wow, how could that be? Yata, so first let me teach you a law. A Kohen, a regular Kohen is not allowed to marry a divorcee, right? It's actually a challenge today. When there's a Kohen who's older in life, and let's say the Kohen loses his wife and he's 56-year-old, he wants to remarry, he can't marry a woman who's a divorcee. So who is the Kohen allowed to marry? If a married woman whose husband died. So if she is a widow, he's allowed to marry, even though she was once married. A regular Kohen is allowed to marry a widow, but a Kohen is not allowed to marry a divorcee. A Kohen Gadol, a high priest, is even not allowed to marry a woman who was, it has to be a virgin. Even if it was a woman who was married and her husband died, he's not allowed to marry her either. A Kohen Gadol, a high priest, has to only marry a virgin, a girl who was never married. So it could come out very interesting. You have a case where the Kohen Gadol's younger brother is obviously a regular Kohen. So the Kohen Gadol is not allowed to marry a divorcee or a widow, but his brother is allowed to marry a widow. Elamiyata, let us say. Elamiyata, let us. Okay, so he's saying Elamiyata. So a Rava, remember Rava is trying to question Abaye's statement. No, I'm sorry, Abaye is trying to question Rava's statement. Rava said a logic that if you're not allowed to the husband, you shouldn't be allowed which you were used to be allowed to. You're prohibited to stay married because you're suspected adulteress. For sure, the brother, which you were never allowed to marry, you for sure shouldn't have to be allowed to do yibum and be married to. He says, I'll disprove this theory. Now, let us see. Kohen Gadol, if you have a high priest, Kiddush Almana, who went and married, he did Kiddushin, he married Almana, a widow, which he wasn't allowed to do. He married a woman he wasn't allowed to marry. Umeis, and he ended up dying. Very interesting case. So he married a woman he's not allowed to marry, Yeshlai, and he died without kids. Yeshlai, Achkotan Kohen Hedyet, he has a younger brother who's not a Kohen Gadol, who is a regular Kohen. The law is that actually, very interesting, that the younger brother could become a yibum of the girl, of this woman. So the woman was married to her husband, who was not allowed to be married to because she was a divorcee. I'm sorry, she was a widow, but then her new husband died too, and without kids. So she goes to the younger brother. But according to your logic, Leitis Yabim, she shouldn't be allowed to marry, to do yibum with the younger brother. Based on your logic, that shouldn't be the law, that she should be allowed to do yibum and marry the younger brother. Based on your rule that if the older brother who she was married to is prohibited, for sure the younger brother should for sure be prohibited. So Imnesra, had Leitis Yabim, Yeshle Achkat and Leitis Yabim. So the Gemara says, what are you talking about? How could you compare that case to our case? Imnesra b'mutar law, we're saying a case where she became prohibited to someone that was allowed to her. My logical inference was, she's prohibited to someone that was permitted to her, she's not allowed for sure, someone that was prohibited to her. But ba'asr law, like kol shekain, he's saying, I'm sorry, that's continuing, the question ends there. That's continuing Abaye's question. Didn't you say why is the younger brother of the Kohen allowed to marry her, the Kohen Gadol? Didn't you say if she's prohibited to someone who's permitted to her is not allowed, for sure someone that's permitted to her? So the Gemara says, Nesra, what are you talking about? She's prohibited from someone that's permitted to her. She's never allowed to be with the older brother. Mutarla, you're saying that she was permitted to be with the older brother. Asura lahu, she's prohibited to be with him. So in other words, your logic questioning my inference, my logical inference works or doesn't work, would not apply to the case of a Kohen Gadol. Again, what did I say? He said, if she's prohibited to someone that's permitted to her, for sure she's prohibited to someone that was originally prohibited to her. But in this case of the Kohen Gadol, she's not prohibited from someone that's permitted to her. She's prohibited from someone that always was prohibited to her. So you can learn it's not similar to our case here. Ella, so he says, well, I'll give you another case. Let me bring you another case, question from another case. Eishes Koyen Shenenza, another very interesting law. It's a sad law. Unfortunately, I know where this, a similar story where this perhaps happened, before the riots in Crown Heights. But anyway, there was someone who was attacked a woman. Without getting into it, there's an interesting law that if someone is a kohen and the wife was raped, unfortunately, I believe that's the halacha, the wife has to be divorced from her husband. So a kohen is not allowed to marry such a woman, right? A kohen is not allowed to marry a woman that happened to. And unfortunately, it's a very sad story that could happen. If a kohen's wife was raped, the kohen now has to divorce his wife. He can't stay married to his wife anymore. So he says, what happens in a case where a kohen's wife was raped against her will? Rashi learns out how we know this halach. But, okay, umeis, and what happens is that the kohen then dies. Now, I guess before he divorced her. Yesh loy achol. Now here's where the case gets very interesting. Now, why does the kohen have to divorce her? Because the kohen can't be with a woman that was with another guy. So a woman that was with another guy, he wouldn't be allowed to marry her. Therefore, he has to divorce her because she was with a guy, even though she was raped. Unfortunately, it's a very sad story. But what happens if that kohen had a younger brother, which was very interesting, which was what we call a cholo? What does it mean? How did he become a cholo? Because how is he the older kohen's brother? Because his father had two sons. Father was a kohen, had two sons was a kohen. Now the younger son was born from another wife, which the father, a kohen, was not allowed to marry. The father married a divorcee. And added, which he was not allowed to marry. A kohen's not allowed to marry a divorcee. They had a son who's a kohen. Now that son is considered a cholo. He's not a full-fledged kohen with honors because he was born from a prohibited marriage that he wasn't allowed to be born. Guess what? This cholo could marry a divorcee because he's not a real full-fledged kohen. So the funny case is, the interesting case that he's bringing down here is the older brother was a full kohen because the father was first married to a woman he was allowed to be married. Then what happened is the wife of that son was raped. Now the older brother can't stay married to her, but before he divorced her, before he gave her a get, he died. Crazy story, right? Very interesting story. And the question is, can she marry the younger brother? And the halach is she could marry the younger brother. Because the younger brother is a cholo kohen, is not a kohen with honors, is not allowed to act as a kohen, can marry the sister. Loitis yabim, but according to your logical inference, she should not be allowed to marry the younger brother. Why? Because what was the logical inference? If the older brother, who was allowed to her, became prohibited, she became prohibited to him because she was raped. For sure, the younger brother, who was never allowed to her because he was always her brother-in-law, for sure she should not be allowed to marry him. So how could the halacha be that she could do yibum based on your logical inference? Abaye is questioning Rava logical inference. So he says back, very simple. Im Nasra,
No, this is part of the question. Im Nesra, using your logical inference, you should not be allowed to marry the younger brother. Im Nesra b'mutter law, your logic was that if she becomes prohibited to someone that is permitted to her, but also like kol shekain, for sure, she should be prohibited to someone that's prohibited to her. So her husband that was permitted to her, she became prohibited to him. For sure, she should be prohibited to the younger brother who she was never allowed to him. She was always permitted to marry him because she was his brother's wife. So the Gemara says, "Oines Yisrael Mishra Shari," a case where it was an oines, where it was a freak accident. She's allowed to marry the younger brother. Oines. He says the halacha is that oines, when someone is raped, when a woman is raped, be Yisrael, when it's her husband is a Yisrael, not a Kohen, Mishra Shari, she's completely allowed. It's only a Kohen that can't stay married to a woman who is raped. But oines, when a woman is raped and her husband's a regular Yisrael, she's completely allowed. The Gabi Dahai, and relative to the younger brother, Leka Yisur, there's no prohibition here at all. So in other words, I guess the prohibition of her staying married to her original husband is solely because she was raped and a Kohen can't stay married to a raped woman. But the younger brother is not a Kohen, and there's nothing wrong with the husband who's not a Kohen to stay married to his wife that God forbid was raped. And therefore, logical inference won't stand in that case. And therefore, Rava's original logic of why did our Mishnah say that she does chalitza, not yibum, stands. The reason why, let's go back to what did Rava want to say, that why can't she do yibum to the younger brother and get married to the younger brother? Because if the one who was permitted to her the whole time, her original husband, she became not allowed to him, for sure the brother-in-law, that she was prohibited the whole time, for sure she shouldn't be allowed to him, and the logic stands. And that is the end of today's